She slapped me. Right there. In front of 70 guests, under a string of fairy lights, at my brother's rehearsal dinner. And no one moved. No one stopped her. I didn't come to cause trouble. I came to support my grandfather. He flew 6 hours from Florida just to see Tyler walk down the aisle. 82 years old. Bad knees. Carry-on suitcase with a handle that barely extended. And when he got there, they sat him grandfather behind the trash cans. Literally. A single plastic chair wedged between 2 dumpsters and a humming kitchen vent. When I asked my mom why, she didn't even blink. He'll embarrass us, she whispered. The way he talks, the way he smells. It's better this way. Better, for who? That man built the family estate. Named the Vineyard after Grandma. Paid for my father's law school. Bought Tyler's first car. But today, he wasn't worthy of a seat at the family table. He was trash adjacent. I clenched my fists. Walked away. I didn't want to cry. I didn't want to explode. But when I saw him sitting there alone, swatting away flies, staring out at the wedding setup he funded, I couldn't stay silent. So I stood up, tapped a fork against my glass, and asked, why is my grandfather seated by the trash while strangers sip champagne at the front table? The music stopped. Conversations died. Heads turned. Then came the sound. Hair heels. Click, click, click. My mother stormed up the aisle like a judge on verdict day. She didn't ask me to step down. She didn't pull me aside. She raised her hand and slapped me. Hard. Sharp. The kind of slap meant to humiliate. You ungrateful thing, she hissed. You don't belong here. And just like that, I was escorted out of my own brother's wedding. But I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I walked. I walked straight out the gate still, holding the green handkerchief my grandfather slipped into my hand as I passed him. A gesture. A whisper. A promise I didn't understand. Yet. If you've ever been humiliated by your own family for doing the right thing, comment, I stood alone too. Because silence doesn't mean surrender. I arrived at Tyler's wedding wearing a forest green dress I'd bought secondhand from a consignment store in Cambridge. It had capped sleeves, a soft neckline, and a loose waist that let me breathe. It was the only thing in my closet that still made me feel like myself. The sun in Napa Valley was relentless. A kind of golden glare that made every flaw feel brighter, sharper. Shadows fell long across the vineyard path as I walked from the valet drop-off toward the main patio. Behind the flower arch, guests laughed over flutes of champagne, designer heels clicking against cobblestone like some kind of musical score I didn't recognize. No one offered me a drink. A waiter passed without a glance. Another held a tray of sparkling rosé just inches from me and veered away before I could speak. I stood there for a second too long, unsure if it was intentional or just invisible. I caught my reflection in the tall glass doors leading to the wine hall. My hair was windblown, my freckles visible without makeup, my lipstick faded from the ride over. I looked like someone who'd been invited by mistake. And maybe I had been. Then I saw her. My mother. Cynthia Lancaster. She was in a cream wrap dress that hugged her frame and screamed old money. She spotted me from across the patio and started walking over slow, deliberate, her eyes sweeping over every inch of me like she was scanning a receipt. You look, she paused, scanning from my thrifted heels to my bare neckline. Decent. That was it. No hug. No. You made it all the way from Boston. No mention that I'd RSVP'd alone while everyone else brought plus ones, spouses, kids, or entourages. Just decent. She turned and walked off before I could respond, already halfway into a conversation with someone in a tighter dress and a louder laugh. I scanned the space, pretending to look for someone I knew. Anyone. But Tyler was busy laughing with his college buddies near the olive grove. He didn't see me. Or maybe he did and looked away. One arm wrapped around his fiancée, the other holding a glass of bourbon that glowed amber in the sun. She wore ivory lace and looked like she'd stepped out of a wedding magazine. When her eyes met mine, there was nothing. Just polite disinterest, We'd met twice. I made my way toward the side patio, somewhere quieter. My seat card, if it even existed, was nowhere to be found. I asked a staffer who pointed me toward a table near the edge, close to the valet station. I sat beside a boy who looked about 14. Later I'd learn he was the valet's son, asked to fill an empty chair for symmetry. And yet, I didn't leave. I stayed because for all their flaws, they were still my family. Because part of me still hoped that being present might mean something. But walking through that venue, surrounded by people who didn't see Mayor, chose not to felt less like showing up to a celebration and more like trespassing on a life I was never truly invited to be part of. Every smile I forced cracked a little thinner. Every minute that passed reminded me of how far I'd drifted from them. Or maybe how far they'd pushed me out. And in that space between string lights and champagne glasses, I realized something. I wasn't a guest here. I was a ghost. And no one mourns a ghost. I saw the black town car before I saw him. It pulled up slowly near the gravel loop, tires crunching like it didn't quite belong in a place this polished. The door opened, and for a moment, all I could see was a handled, wrinkled, but steady gripping the edge of the frame. Then he stepped out. Grandpa Walter. 82 years old, stooped but upright. Dressed in a dark blue suit that looked like it had been pressed for a funeral, not a wedding. His tie was crooked. His shoes were dull. But his eyes lit up the moment they found me. "Ava," he said, voice raspy but certain. "You're the only one worth flying for." I couldn't speak. I just hugged him, right there in the driveway, my cheek pressed to his chest. I could smell peppermint gum and the faint aftershave he always wore. And beneath that, something older. Time, maybe. He'd flown across the country to be here. Not for the venue, not for the spectacle, but for family, for Tyler, for a grandson who wouldn't even look up from his bourbon. I offered him my arm. "Come on, let's find your seat." He patted my hand. "Lead the way." A staffer in a black vest appeared before we got far, holding a clipboard and wearing that thin, polished smile you reserve for people you've been warned about. "Guest name?" "Walter Lancaster," I said. He scanned his list, nodded once, and motioned for us to follow. We moved past the flower arch, past the koi pond, past the outdoor kitchen where caterers were grilling duck and tossing salads like theater. The further we walked, the quieter it got. And then he pointed. "There," he said. A single white plastic chair. No cushion. No name tag. Just barely wedged between two industrial trash bins and a catering tent vent that hummed like an old refrigerator. I blinked. This can't be right." The staffer shrugged. "It's what's on the chart." Then, I turned to Grandpa. His expression didn't change. Not a flicker. He just looked at it like it was a patch of dead grass. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "It's fine," he said, still calm. "I've sat in worse places. But I wasn't fine." I turned to look for my mother. She wasn't far, standing under a canopy of string lights, adjusting her gold bracelet in the sun like nothing in the world could touch her. "Why is Grandpa sitting back here?" I asked, walking over. She barely looked up. "He insisted on coming. I told him he wouldn't enjoy himself." "That's not an answer." Her eyes locked on mine, cold and sharp. "Beggars can't be choosers." I stared at her. "He's not a beggar." She stepped closer. "He's a liability, the way he talks, the way he eats, the way he smells." She hissed, "He will embarrass us." That was when something cracked inside, meant out loud, not visible, but deep. Like the kind of crack you only hear in your chest. I walked away, fists clenched at my sides. But Grandpa didn't complain. He didn't cause a scene. He just sat down next to garbage and a humming vent as if that's all he deserved. And no one said a word. No one even looked twice. I don't know what finally pushed me over the edge. Maybe it was the way the sunlight caught Grandpa's glasses as he sat there half in shadow, half in trash steam. Maybe it was the way his suit, carefully ironed that morning, now clung to the side of a buzzing catering tent like it belonged in a loading zone, not a celebration. Maybe it was the silence. The way no one cared enough to notice how wrong it was. Whatever it was, it didn't happen all at once. It built slowly, quietly. Like pressure behind your eyes before a cry you refuse to let fall. I stood up from the table they'd placed me at next to the valet's teenage son and walked toward the center of the patio. The string lights above flickered faintly in the late afternoon sun. People were milling about, laughing over cocktails, adjusting corsages, sipping rosé like this wasn't a wedding built on exclusion. I reached the welcome arch. There was a small platform bare, decorative, a stage meant for toasts and cute engagement stories. I picked up a fork from a nearby table and tapped it gently against a champagne glass. The sound was soft at first, then sharper. Ding. Heads turned. Conversation stalled mid-sentence. I cleared my throat. My voice felt like it might crack, but I didn't let it. Hi. I began, soft but steady. Sorry to interrupt. I just have a quick question. The crowd shifted, unsure. I took a breath. I was wondering, why is my grandfather seated next to the trash bins, while strangers are sitting at the family table? Silence. The kind that expands. Someone's bracelet jingled. Someone else coughed. Then heels. Fast, deliberate, expensive. Click, click, click. My mother came storming up the aisle, jaw locked, eyes burning like I'd just ruined the Met Gala. She didn't speak at first. She didn't need to. The air around her said everything. You've embarrassed me. Her hand rose before I even saw it coming. Crack. The slap echoed like a gunshot across wine glasses and olive trees. Gasps. I didn't stumble. But I felt it. She leaned in close. You ungrateful thing, she hissed. You don't belong here. Then she turned sharp, graceful, venomous and called to a staffer near the floral tent. Escort her out. I waited for someone to speak up. Tyler. My dad. A family friend. Anyone. But no one moved. My heels scraped the gravel as I turned, the hem of my dress brushing dusty stone. I didn't cry, I didn't yell, I didn't plead. I just walked. Past the potted olive trees. Past the champagne tables. Past people who wouldn't meet my eyes. As I reached the edge of the patio, I felt a hand slip into Minero, warm, familiar. Grandpa. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He just pressed something into my palm. A handkerchief. Green silk. Frayed edges. The faint scent of peppermint. I looked down. His initials embroidered faintly in silver thread. W.L. I closed my fingers around it like a promise. Then I kept walking out the side gate and into the gravel circle. My skin burned from the slap. But what hurt more was the silence. The silence of a family that let it happen. The silence of people who chose not to see. I sat on a low stone wall near the edge of the parking circle, staring out at the vineyard I wasn't welcome in. The sun had started to shift, casting long amber streaks across the gravel. I ran my thumb along the embroidery on the green handkerchief Grandpa had given me. W.L. Faded silver thread, stitched into soft silk. It felt like something sacred, like a part of him was holding me together. I didn't have anywhere to go, not really. I wasn't going to head back to the hotel, or worse, call a car and explain to some stranger that I'd just been slapped and ejected from my brother's wedding rehearsal. I just needed air. Silence. Something real. That's when I heard it. A low, heavy hum deeper than a standard car, smoother than any engine I knew. It didn't sound like a rental or a family SUV. It sounded like presence. I turned toward the gravel path behind the main house. Out from the trees came a sleek black Rolls-Royce, gliding like a shadow made of steel. The windows were tinted. The finish gleamed like polished obsidian. Behind it, two dark SUVs rolled in quietly, forming a small procession. No noise. No music. Just the quiet authority of money moving like it didn't need permission. I stood up slowly. The chauffeur stepped out first, tall, poised, dressed in a charcoal suit that didn't wrinkle. He opened the rear passenger door like he was unveiling something important. And then I saw him. Grandpa. But not the version I'd just helped to a folding chair. Not the man in a crooked tie and worn-out shoes. This was Walter Lancaster. He stepped out of the Rolls-Royce like it was his second skin. Tailored suit, polished shoes, and sunglasses, not the drugstore kind but real ones, the kind that cost more than most people's rent. Two men in dark suits followed behind him, scanning the property with calm precision. Security. Not hired for today. No hired for him. He saw me. Paused. Took off his sunglasses. Then he smiled. A small, tight smile like someone who'd been waiting for this exact moment. Well, sweetheart, he said, voice clear and strong. Ready to shake things up? I blinked. Grandpa. What's going on? He tilted his head toward the reception area. Let's see if your brother remembers who actually owns this land. His words hit me like cold water. I froze. What? But he didn't explain. He didn't have to. The staff at the main gate had already gone still. One whispered something to another. Another reached for a walkie-talkie. And hesitated. Then something impossible happened. One of them, same uniform, same clipboard, walked to the side gate I'd just been pushed through not even an hour ago. And held it open. For him. For us. My fingers clenched tighter around the silk handkerchief in my palm. My feet moved, slowly, without thinking. I wasn't just walking anymore. I was following a man who didn't need to raise his voice to change the air in a room. I was following truth. If someone ever tried to erase you, only to face the truth later, comment, I remember everything. Because sometimes silence carries more power than the loudest lie. We walked through the open gate like ghosts, reclaiming a house no one thought we'd return to. Except we weren't ghosts anymore. Grandpa didn't say much as we crossed the stone path toward the main patio. He didn't need to. His presence said everything. The staff parted like water. No questions, no resistance. Just quiet acknowledgement of something bigger than theme and name. A legacy, a truth they hadn't been told. Music floated through the air. The crowd inside the open-air reception was mid-toast. Someone raised a glass. Someone laughed too loudly. The string quartet continued playing a soft, almost cinematic version of Can't Help Falling in Love. I stayed low, keeping near the potted olive trees. I wasn't hiding, I just wasn't ready to be seen. Not yet. Through the branches, I saw my mother holding the microphone. Her voice rang out, clear and rehearsed. And to my son, Tyler, whose vision and ambition brought us all together today. My stomach twisted. She didn't pause to acknowledge Grandpa's absence. Or mine. Not a word about who actually built the land she was standing on. But then something shifted. The music slowed. The quartet members exchanged glances. Heads began to turn. Whispers rose like static. And my mother, perfect, poised, pristine, froze mid-sentence. Because Grandpa had entered the room. He didn't rush. He didn't wave. He simply walked straight down the center aisle between white chairs and expensive shoes, past guests who suddenly couldn't decide whether to stand or sit. He looked like he'd done this before. And maybe he had. By the time he reached the front, my mother was still standing with the mic in her hand. Her smile had dropped into something else. Confusion? Fear? Recognition? He stepped beside her. Reached out. And gently took the microphone from her fingers. She didn't resist. She just stepped back. Like someone who'd seen a ghost. Grandpa faced the crowd. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. I wasn't going to say anything, he began. Didn't want to make a fuss. It's a wedding, after all. There were small chuckles, nervous ones. But maybe, he continued, it's time people knew what really built this family. He looked across the patio. I watched him scan the faces. Tyler, holding a champagne flute midair. My father, suddenly very still. Guests blinking like they'd lost the plot. I'm 2 years old, Grandpa said. And I flew here today because I thought I mattered, because I thought family was about showing up. A few heads dipped. I built this vineyard with my own hands. Named it after my late wife. Gave it to the family in good faith, and when I arrived today, he paused. Just for a breath. No one knew who I was. No one invited me. The driver at the gate didn't recognize me. My name wasn't on any list. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. He waited for them to settle, then added, almost dryly, I was seated behind the trash bins. You could hear the weight in the airshift. No one laughed now. Grandpa glanced at my parents, at Tyler, and then, almost casually, he said 7 words that dropped like a stone into still water. I built this for her, not you. The stillness that followed wasn't polite. It was stunned. Forks stopped midair. Champagne glasses lowered without toasts. Even the wind seemed to hesitate. And somewhere in the back, hidden behind olive trees and half-shadowed light, I stood completely still. Not because I was afraid, but because I knew. This was only the beginning. For a moment, no one moved. My mother stood frozen beside the string quartet, her hand still slightly raised, as if expecting the microphone to return. My father had gone pale, like a man realizing the stage lights were gone and the audience had stayed. Tyler looked down at his shoes, as if searching for an escape hatch. And me? I was still by the olive trees, fingers wrapped around Grandpa's handkerchief, heart thudding like it could burst through my ribs at any second. Grandpa took a step back and scanned the crowd once more. Calm. Controlled. But beneath it, something deeper. Something rising. I wasn't on the guest list, he said again, this time slower. No one knew I was coming. No one asked if I'd be here. The family table was full of strangers. He let the weight of that sit. I sat near the kitchen vent, beside a trash bin, in a folding chair that wasn't even mine. Now, I'm not much for spectacle, but I know the difference between a seat and a message. He turned his gaze directly to my parents. And I received the message. Loud and clear. My mother's hand tightened around the back of a chair. My father still didn't speak. Then Grandpa reached into the inside pocket of his blazer and pulled out an envelope. Cream-colored. Thick. A seal stamped across the back in bold navy wax. He walked across the patio, past stunned guests, and stopped in front of me. My feet moved on their own. I stepped forward, closing the space between us. Everyone was watching, but all I could see was his face. Soft, tired, determined. This is yours, he said, offering me the envelope. It always was. I stared at it. I didn't open it. Not yet. The paper was heavier than it looked. My fingers trembled slightly as I held it in both hands. Tyler stepped forward, voice tight. Whatever that is, it's not valid. He changed it. Months later, I finally looked at the envelope. The date printed at the top, bold and clear, was from over a year ago. Before the pneumonia scare. Before the silence. Before everything shifted. From the other side of the patio, someone spoke me Uncle Greg, Mom's cousin. Is that true? Grandpa didn't answer with words. He turned slowly to face my father. You told the lawyer I was mentally unfit, Grandpa said, voice firmer now. You forged the medical affidavit while I was sedated. Used my hospital stay as your cover. My chest tightened. A memory hit me like a gust of cold air. The winter 3 years ago. The pneumonia. The week I spent driving through snowstorms to bring him soup. The late-night phone calls. The sound of his breathing through the receiver. Then, silence. The calls stopped. And I assumed he'd recovered and just moved on. But now I knew why they stopped. My mother leaned in to whisper something to Tyler. Grandpa raised a hand. Don't. Not today. The crowd went quiet again. Not the stunned kind anymore, but the kind that precedes something undeniable. Then Grandpa did something no one expected. He lifted his cane and slammed it down against the table beside him. The crack echoed. You didn't just take from me, he said, staring at my parents. You stole from her. And suddenly, all eyes were on me. The air felt heavier after Grandpa spoke. Not just metaphorically, actually heavy. Like the sky had dropped a few inches lower, and everyone could feel it pressing down on their shoulders. My hands were still wrapped around the sealed envelope, the paper softening at the edges from the heat of my palms. I didn't move. I didn't speak. But inside, something had shifted. A knot I'd carried for years was loosening, slowly, painfully. I thought that moment would be the end of it. I was wrong. It was just the beginning. Later that night, after most of the guests had left and the catering staff had begun packing up, I got a call. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail until something in me said, "Pick up." The voice on the other end was low, familiar, and urgent. "Ava," he whispered. "It's Mateo. You need to come now. They're about to dump everything." Mateo. He used to work in the cellar years ago. Quiet. Loyal. The kind of guy who remembered birthdays even after he left. He disappeared not long after Tyler took over operations. I never knew why. Now I did. 15 minutes later, I was at the back entrance of the Vineyard's processing facility. The air was cold, dry, biting through my jacket. Mateo met me outside, hoodie pulled low, keys yangling nervously in his hand. "They're destroying the last batch," he said. "The one your grandmother helped blend before she passed." I froze. "What?" "They poured industrial solvent into the fermentation tanks," he said, voice shaking. "Said it was a cleaning protocol, but it wasn't listed." I double-checked. Then I saw Jason come in after hours. Twice. I have it on camera. We slipped inside. The place smelled wrong. Sharp, chemical, astringent, nothing like the usual mix of yeast and oak and grapes. Mateo led me to the fermentation wing. One of the steel tanks hissed faintly. I stepped closer. Foam clung to the inside walls. The air stung my eyes. I instinctively covered my mouth with my sleeve. "What is this?" "Solvent," he said. "Methyl something, way beyond normal sanitation." He pulled a USB from his pocket. I downloaded the surveillance footage, and, look, I wasn't going to say anything. But Jason offered me 10 grand to shut up. I stared at him. "And you didn't take it?" "I did," he said quietly. "Then I gave the money to charity and called you." "Ah." He reached behind a crate and handed me a sealed bottle. "It's from the last untainted batch. You'll need it for testing." I looked at the bottle. Then the tanks. Then him. Everything felt warped. Tilted. Like the whole ground under the vineyard had shifted and no one else noticed. "They weren't just trying to erase her memory," I said. "They were trying to destroy her work." Mateo nodded. "And frame it as contamination. Something minor. Something no one would trace back to them." Ugh. My throat tightened. I slid the USB into my purse, cradled the bottle in my arms, and walked out of the building like I was carrying a secret buried in glass. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat in my hotel room, watching the same frame on the video replay over and over again. Jason's hand, reaching for the hatch, glancing over his shoulder. Then pouring. Careful. Deliberate. And for the first time, I realized this wasn't just about money. It was about erasure. Of her. Of me. Of everything that didn't serve their version of the story. The next morning, the sky was gray. Not stormy, not dramatic, just blank. Like the weather was holding its breath, the way I was. I drove in silence. No music. No podcasts. Just the soft hum of tires against the highway and the occasional clink of the sealed wine bottle in the passenger seat. The USB sat in my coat pocket, heavier than anything digital had a right to feel. When I pulled into the Vineyard's estate office, the gravel lot was already half full. Sleek sedans lined up like this was a shareholder retreat, not a family funeral. And in some ways, that's exactly what it was. I walked through the back entrancino announcement. No knock. The boardroom door was open. I stepped inside mid-sentence. Jason was speaking, hands animated, voice smooth, trying to spin chaos into control. And while we understand there was a minor error in sanitation, he said, "We've already begun implementing." He stopped. Everyone stopped. The room turned toward me like one organism with 100 blinking eyes. I didn't say a word. I placed the bottle of my grandmother's last vintage right in the center of the polished table. Then the USB. No drama, no performance. Just truth laid out in glass and plastic. My mother was seated near the window. She didn't bother to mask her expression, pure contempt. You don't belong here, she said, voice clipped. You were removed from the board. I didn't blink. I walked to the projector. Plugged in the USB. The screen on the far wall flickered. Then loaded. Footage played. Jason, entering the fermentation wing after hours. A timestamp. A close-up of him looking over his shoulder. Then frame by frame pouring something into the tank. No narration. No music. Just evidence. A quiet man I didn't recognize, a legal officer, maybe spoke first. This, if verified, he said slowly, constitutes intentional product sabotage. That's felony-level misconduct. He turned to my mother. And if your signature appears on the override protocol, I didn't need to say a word. Because the next image was a photo I had taken the night before. A laminated emergency sheet pinned to the lab bulletin board. Her signature, clear as daylight, stamped across the bottom. This wine, I said, voice steady, was the last blend my grandmother touched. Before she passed. You didn't just ruin a product, you desecrated a memory. My father broke the silence, tone brittle. You'll destroy us all, Ava. Think about what you're doing. I am thinking, I said. I thought about it all night. Then the boardroom door opened one more time. Everyone turned. And there he was. Grandpa. He moved slower this morning. The night had taken something out of him. But his gaze, as sharp, alert, was unshaken. He didn't speak at first, just walked to the head of the table and handed a sealed envelope to the firm's attorney. Then he cleared his throat. About a year ago, he said calmly, I revised the family trust. A ripple of noise rolled through the room. Jason's jaw tightened. My mother's hands curled into fists. I no longer trust this board, Grandpa continued. Too much ego, too little legacy. The lawyer opened the envelope. Read silently, then looked up. Effective immediately, he said. Ava Lancaster holds full power of attorney over all family operations. The vineyard, the land, and all assets are now held under a separate estate trust in her name. I couldn't breathe. Not at first. Grandpa turned to my mother. You disowned your daughter out of pride, he said softly. Called her a burden. An embarrassment. Then his voice sharpened. But now, it's her name that saves you from collapse. That was. Jason shoved his chair back and stormed out. No one followed. The doors slammed behind him with a finality that echoed. And for the first time, no one tried to silence me. 3 weeks passed. The vineyard, once quiet and stagnant, had started to breathe again. Gone were the hush-toned board meetings and locked doors. In their place came movement, soft, deliberate, human. Workers returned. Mateo rejoined the cellar team. Old neighbors stopped by with baskets of lemons and home-baked bread. The silence that once smothered every space had been replaced by something else. Presence. The garden bloomed first. It always started there. We hung lanterns from the olive trees. Strung linen along wooden tables. Mateo repaired the pergola where Grandma used to hum her way through pruning sessions. I planted rosemary along the old fence line and scrubbed the rust from the bench beside the citrus trees. And when the sun began to lower, washing everything in a late summer gold, the guests started arriving. Not in limousines. Not with stylists or champagne toasts. Just people. Real ones. Friends of my grandmother. Former employees. A few townsfolk who remembered what the vineyard used to stand for. Even the mayor showed up in khakis and worn boots, carrying a bottle of Zinfandel older than I was. I wore a simple navy dress. No makeup. My hair pulled back with a pin Mateo found in one of Grandma's old desk drawers shaped like a grapevine, wrapped in a linen handkerchief that still carried her scent. No one took photos. There were no speeches prepared. And yet every word spoken that night was honest. I walked from table to table, topping off glasses, offering slices of rosemary focaccia. People asked about the new press I'd ordered, complimented the rose trellis I'd rebuilt. They didn't ask about Jason, or my mother, or what had happened in the boardroom. It was as if the vineyard itself had decided who belonged and who didn't. And then, as the sky turned lavender and the first paper lanterns began to glow, a black SUV pulled onto the gravel path. Every conversation dimmed. People turned instinctively. The door opened, and Grandpa stepped out, slowly, carefully, but without help. His suit was old, pressed neat. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his cane. But his eyes were clear, focused, proud. He walked across the garden each step like punctuation and stopped when he reached me. I offered him my arm. He took it. We walked together to the riser by the pergola. Mateo handed him a microphone. And when Grandpa spoke, it wasn't loud, but every voice went quiet. To the one, he said, who remembered what family is supposed to mean. The wind softened. The olive trees stilled. This vineyard doesn't belong to me anymore, he continued. And it hasn't for a while. And 5. He looked at me, then back at the crowd. It belongs to Ava. Not because of blood. Not because of name. But because she remembered what it means to love this land, and the people who built it. I didn't breathe. Not at first. Then he said the words that made the air catch in every throat present. By my hand, by Carmen's wish, and by the deeds Ava carried in silence, she is the rightful heir. A soft gasp moved through the garden. From the far side, a voice rang out sharp, scoffing. Vincent, you can't do that, he barked, stepping forward. This is a family estate. You can't just give it away. Grandpa didn't flinch. He turned. Watch me. The garden went still again. Then another voice spoke, calm, steady. From the crowd stepped a man in a gray suit, Mr. Landry, the estate lawyer. Everything has already been finalized. The deeds were transferred 3 weeks ago. It's done. Irrevocable. My mother's face drained of color. She stood beside the hedges, arms crossed, too late to stop any of it. She looked around the garden like it had betrayed her. This is ridiculous, she whispered. You're tearing this family apart. But no one moved. Not even Vincent. And just like that, they left. No tantrum. No drama. Just silence. And in that silence, something else was restored. Not property. Not inheritance. But meaning. Later that night, long after the guests had gone home and the lanterns stopped flickering, I stayed behind. The vineyard was quiet again, but not the kind of quiet that weighs on your chest. It was soft, honest, like an exhale after years of holding everything in. I walked alone through the lower garden, guided by moonlight and memory. The same gravel path Grandma used to take. The same place she planted roses, even after arthritis made it hard to grip the shears. Her scent still lingered here sometimes. Not in the literal sense, but in the way certain spaces hold the people who once loved them. I stopped beside the old vine near the south wall. She always kept a wooden crate tucked under it. Used to joke it held miracles and aspirin. When I was little, I'd sneak lozenges from it, pretending they were enchanted seeds. The soil was dry, cracked, but still warm. I crouched down and ran my fingers through the dirt. And there, under a thin layer of roots and thyme, I felt something hard, something buried. A small tin box, rusted at the edges, cool against my palms. I opened it. Inside was a folded envelope wrapped in linen cloth, and a single dried grape leaf. Its stem curved like a tiny, reaching hand. The handwriting on the envelope was unmistakable. To Ava. My throat tightened. I unwrapped it slowly, careful not to tear the linen. Her script flowed in soft, looping lines. I could hear her voice with every word. If you're reading this, then you already know the truth. They never saw your strength, child, but I did. I saw it when you stitched broken bird wings with tape. When you gave up your share of pie for Lily. When you let silence define your worth just to keep peace at dinner. You always gave more than you were given. That's your power. But don't let them define your worth. My eyes blurred, but I didn't cry. Not this time. I held the letter against my chest, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to fight to be here. I just was. Belonging wasn't something I had to earn anymore. This land, these vines, this breath in my chest, they all made space for me now. I sat on the bench near the old pergola, the one Matteo had helped me repair, and watched as a breeze moved through the rows like a gentle tide. The vines swayed, not with chaos but with rhythm. And then I heard it. Just faintly. Her humming. A few bars. Soft. Familiar. Maybe it was memory. Maybe something more. Either way, it made me smile. I reached for my notebook and began to sketch the vineyard again, not as it was, but as it could be. Sloping rows near the ridge for Pinot. A pergola near the roses. A heart drawn around a small block near the citrus trees. I labeled it Carmen's Grace. Not as a monument. Not as revenge. But as a promise. If you've ever rebuilt something others tried to destroy, share your story in the comments. This is for those who bloom after being buried. The night before the harvest, I stood alone between the rows of grapes. There was no wind, no moonlight, just the faint hum of the vines, the quiet shifting of leaves in the dark, and the steady rhythm of my own breath. In my hand was the vineyard sketch, the one I had finished the night I found Grandma's letter. Matteo had rolled it into a tube and tied it with twine. He said it looked like hope finally had a blueprint. Maybe it did. Earlier that day, we'd installed a brass plaque at the foot of the oldest vine near the garden wall. Simple. Honest. It read, "For Carmen. For those who bloom after being buried." It wasn't just for her. It was for anyone who'd been erased. Anyone who'd been pushed aside, told they were too much or not enough, too soft or too inconvenient. Anyone who kept showing up anyway, quietly, steadily, because love doesn't need permission to stay rooted. That was the final lesson she left me with. Not written. Not said aloud. But lived. She didn't fight to be seen. She tended what mattered until it spoke for her. And now, I understand. I used to think legacy was something printed on a deed or sewn into a last name. But it's not. Legacy is the way soil remembers gentle hands. The way a vine leans toward the person who whispered to it in spring. The way a place holds shape around the one who loved it long after they're gone. I used to beg for belonging. Used to twist myself small to fit at tables that were never built for me. Now I build the tables. And I plant the vines. And if I ever have a daughter, biological or otherwise, I'll walk her through this land and tell her, you don't need their permission to take up space. You were never the embarrassment. You were the root. Later that week, during the first official community tour of the vineyard, a little girl tugged at her dad's sleeve and asked, "Is she the one who saved it?" He looked at me. I smiled. And he nodded. The question wasn't about pride. It was about recognition. And for the first time, I didn't shrink under it. I just stood where I was, feet planted deep in the earth. I almost low stand, said softly. It always knew how to survive. I just gave it the chance. Foreground. The tour moved on, winding through rows of Pinot and Syrah. I lingered near the pergola, beneath a stretch of grapevines that still carried the scent of sun-warmed fruit. Matteo walked up beside me and handed me a glass of water, eyes soft with the kind of understanding that doesn't need words. You made this place a home again, he said. I looked out at the vineyard, the slow dance of light and soil and time. No, I replied. It always was. I just had to come back differently,